In news headlines this week, cut back on the booze, doctor's orders. Egg freezing program gets a cold reception. And eating more fruit and veg may cheer you up.
This is InFocus Christian News and Current Affairs.
Hello, it's great to be with you for another week of news, views and interviews. Welcome to Record in Focus. And because we like to keep you on your toes, we're mixing things up a bit this week. We've got Sibel Coutet at the news desk.
It's great to be here, Kent, thanks. But unfortunately, Danielle's not quite 100%.
Yeah, well, God willing, she'll be back with us next week. Now, Sibel, does your family sponsor a child?
It's something that the kids are actually looking into at the moment.
Okay, well, you'll be very interested in our interview today because we're going to be chatting with Brad Watson from Avondale College of Education. He's been working on a PhD on the topic of child sponsorship, which is actually quite a controversial topic in some circles.
I'll be watching out for it. Thank you.
What else? I caught up with James Standish earlier for Freedom in Focus, and for sporty people like yourself, Sibel, because I know you're a bit of a jogger, Sue Rad has the lowdown on those energy drinks.
That's fascinating. Speaking of drinking, Kent, Australia's doctors are urging the federal government to take strong action in response to the nation's alcohol problem. The Australian Medical Association, or AMA, says alcohol kills 15 Australians every day and is responsible for economic losses of up to $36 billion per year. The AMA wants the government to tax cheap drinks more heavily and to step in to regulate alcohol advertising and promotion in sport. Both the government and the federal opposition have made public statements recognising Australia's drinking problem, but neither has committed to making any policy changes. Community groups say the time for lip service has passed.
Look, governments often talk big but act small. And in the area of alcohol we have a major community problem. And I think they're a little wary because so many people drink, so many big industries are involved, so much taxation comes into the coffers from these areas. But we do know that if you do increase the tax, it does slow down the amount that would be consumed.
More than 660 churches around Australia set aside time last weekend to pray for victims of persecution in Iraq and Syria. The focus of Solidarity Sunday, or Solidarity Sabbath, was not just on the plight of Christians, but also on other religious minorities, including Yazidi and Shia Muslims, who have been targeted by ISIS militants. Some congregations committed to raising the issues not just in the church services, but in their local communities. Solidarity Sunday was an initiative of the Australian Christian Lobby. Doctrinal differences that have divided Christians for more than 1,500 years are being healed as church leaders come together for dialogue. The Council of Chalcedon in the year 451 AD saw the Roman Catholic and Eastern Orthodox churches part ways with the Oriental Orthodox churches. At issue was the person of Christ, with disagreements emerging over how his divine and human natures were combined. Since the 1960s, however, Oriental Orthodox churches, which are strong in Ethiopia, Eritrea and Armenia, have been pursuing unity with other churches on their understanding of the nature of Christ. In the latest round of talks, Oriental Orthodox churches have released a doctrinal statement on Christology, together with the Anglican Communion. Statements on the compatibility of creation and evolution from Pope Francis have produced both dismay and celebration. According to the Religion News Service, the head of the world's 1.2 billion Catholics said the Big Bang Theory did not contradict the role of the divine creator, but actually required it. He also suggested that evolution is not opposed to the notion of creation, because evolution needs living things that can evolve. But despite the media attention the Pope's comments have attracted, they are consistent with statements from various popes since 1950. In contrast, the Seventh-day Adventist Church is seeking to strengthen its official stance on creation, with world church leaders last month recommending a statement on a recent six-day creation for approval by church members. For more details and analysis on both these stories, visit record.net.au. Revelations that tech giants Apple and Facebook are offering to pay for female employees to have their eggs frozen until they're ready to have children have been met with disgust by some church and family groups. According to The Tablet, Germany's Catholic bishops have been particularly scathing, saying the policy is totally wrong and sends the message that children are less important than career or economic concerns. Instead, they suggest workplaces should become more child-friendly so employees don't feel they're forced to choose between parenting and work. Christians in India say government policy is failing to support their most vulnerable members, while it continues to provide special assistance to Hindus, Buddhists and Sikhs. According to World Watch Monitor, the low-caste Dalit people, previously known as untouchables, receive job and education assistance in recognition of their social disadvantage. But if they're Christian or Muslim, the government officially considers them to be outside the Hindu caste system. Dalit Christians who have converted from Hinduism say changing religions does not raise their status in society or reduce discrimination, but only disadvantages them as they lose government assistance. They're calling for equal recognition with the rest of the Dalit population. The results of a student medical research project have gone viral, with major media organisations around the world reporting that vegetarianism causes a lower sperm count in men. A part of the shock value of the story is that the research comes out of Loma Linda University in California, a Seventh-day Adventist institution that has produced a number of major health studies demonstrating the many benefits of a plant-based diet. But according to Adventist Review, the lead researcher has said that while her results were consistent with other similar studies on diet and sperm count, her sample size was small, and the results were not clinically significant. And still on health, a University of Queensland study has found a link between eating at least 8 portions of fruit or vegetables every day and happiness. Respondents to a survey of more than 12,000 Australian adults who ate a lot of fruit and veg were also more likely to provide positive answers to questions about mental and emotional well-being. According to the ABC, researchers are not sure if it's the fruit and vegetables that are producing the happiness or if there are other factors involved. They say it's not the first study that has had similar results, but would still like to explore the connection in more detail. It's been called a cross between Chariots of Fire and Karate Kid. 1500 Steps is an Australian coming-of-age film with an eternal message. 1500 Steps is the first feature film directed by Josh Reed, who heads up Christian radio station Pulse FM in Wollongong. He says it's a different type of Christian film. 1500 Steps premieres on the 15th of November.
Is that a good time?
That is a very, very good time,
Yeah.
my boy.
And that's the news for this week. Kent?
Thanks, Abel. Now, we actually had Josh Reed in earlier this year for an interview. He's a great guy. He's clearly not afraid of a bit of hard work, Christian radio, writing a book, and now directing a film. Oh, and he's also a dad.
Wow, a busy man, and productive too.
Oh, you're not kidding. Hey, stay with us. Freedom in Focus is up next.
Every week, It Is Written is available to millions of free-to-air viewers throughout Australia, New Zealand, New Guinea and the Pacific. It Is Written's Gary Kent regularly takes viewers to the far corners of the globe to report on new evidence and discoveries that confirm the Bible and Christian beliefs. It Is Written also provides medical care to remote Pacific Island communities. Join Gary Kent each week for It Is Written. See television guides and the It Is Written website for broadcast times. It Is Written with Gary Kent. It really is television that changes lives.
The media targets our goals with destructive messages. But is there an alternative? Yes, it's Gigi. Gigi is a great new magazine for teenage girls that uplifts good Christian values. Finally, a way to pass on our values in a way the teenage girls in our life will love. So give a subscription to a teenage girl you love today. Visit gigimagazine.com.au. That's gigimagazine.com.au.
Hello, welcome back. Well, Houston, we have a problem. It's been all over social media. The story that in the United States city of Houston in Texas, there's been a push there to subpoena sermons from churches in the area. What is going on, James Standish?
Well, this is all part of a story that involves a lawsuit between conservative Christians and a very what you might say, progressive or liberal or leftist or whatever you want to call it, city. The city passed an ordinance that is ostensibly to protect the human rights of individuals,
some
equality
sort of
rights.
Anti-discrimination.
That's exactly right.
Okay.
Now, part of that ordinance says that private businesses cannot discriminate against gay and lesbian people within the ambit. The question is, what if you are a Christian, conservative Christian couple, run a small business, and you don't feel comfortable being part in any way in a same-sex marriage ceremony, as an example?
And this has happened. We've had you come to the cake shop and say, can I please have a cake for my same-sex wedding? They are not comfortable. Ends up in court. Okay.
And the wedding photographer case and the marriage celebrant cases. So these are starting to multiply up. So conservative Christians have gotten together and said, we want to repeal this. There's a mechanism in Houston where if you get enough signatures, you can get something on the ballot, you can get a vote, and so forth.
Okay.
They did that. They collected the signatures. The city conveniently found that the signatures were not appropriate in some way or another. So now the conservative groups, the conservative Christian groups, are now suing the city. And then the city, in response to that, put out an incredibly broad, invasive subpoena for all kinds of documents, anything that churches have said, and sermons and so forth, that touched on issues, homosexuality.
Looking for discriminatory language, sort of thing?
But that's not the question in the case, is it? So it was more broadly, I think, an effort to intimidate the churches and possibly to go on, sort of a hunt through everything to take things out and embarrass them and so forth.
Yeah.
So this caught, of course, a lot of national attention because people are asking themselves, what is the implication for religious freedom when we add a new right to the panoply of rights?
Yeah, well, that's fair enough in Houston in that particular situation. But what about for the rest of us, James? What are the implications for the rest of us?
Sure.
Are there principles or lessons we can take from this?
I think they're very big ones. Very quickly, Houston subsequently narrowed the scope of their subpoena. It's still very broad. For the rest of us, I think we have to keep in mind that maybe people want to tell us that adding protection for gay and lesbians is not going to have an impact on religious freedom. That is fundamentally untrue. So the question is, how do we balance the rights? How do we have rights and respect for gay and lesbians, which I certainly want, but at the same time, we do not compromise religious freedom. The only way to do that is to make sure that the clash of rights is thought about in advance and enunciated in advance, so we don't end up in situations where religious freedom becomes a second-class right and people of faith are marginalized and stigmatized by cities like Houston who use the gay rights issue as a wedge or a hammer on people who disagree with that lifestyle.
Boy, lots more discussion we could be having there, James. But yeah, thanks so much for those insights.
Thank you.
Have you been hot and dusty and tired because you've just exercised too much? You're out mowing the lawn, or you're in the gym and you just work too hard and just reach for the shelf, and what do you get? One of those sports drinks. It's a healthy drink, and that's why we have Sue Rad today. Should you be getting a glass of water or a can of Coke, Sue?
A glass of water for most people, James.
A glass of water? I had no idea
why.
Sports drinks I thought were healthy.
Yeah, most people think that, but really sports drinks are just a formulated beverage that contains between 6 to 8% sugar, some electrolytes, things like salt, and colours and flavours. Some of them have some other added vitamins and minerals, but primarily they're just a sugary drink. And so for most people, this just means that they have the propensity to help you gain more weight, promote dental caries, bring on diabetes earlier, and even things like gout and high blood pressure.
I had no idea they actually had sugar in them.
They do.
Because I thought it was a healthy drink.
Well, they were actually formulated back in the 1960s, and Gatorade was the first one for the team, the football team, the Gators, and they were formulated for elite athletes. So they were never developed or invented for the ordinary person, the ordinary Aussie or Brit or American, but for elite athletes that, have intensive workouts, and they were formulated in such a way to help them replace fluid and carbohydrates so they could continue to perform and win races and not become dehydrated and drop dead in the field.
Now, you were telling me even for elite athletes, though, they're a bit dangerous because they've been affecting their teeth.
Yes, well, that's right. Just published in the British, in a British Journal of Sports Medicine, they've shown that 75% of elite athletes have dental caries, and that's because they're drinking these kind of fluids, not only sugary, but they're acidic and sipping on all kinds of sugary gels. So they have the propensity for children, especially who are not elite athletes, to promote dental caries.
Well, look, as a dad, I just see the sports drinks that, oh, they must be healthy. I have electrolytes. But it's the salt and it's the sugar. And
so for most Australians or New Zealanders who are not even meeting the national guidelines on physical activity, which are to exercise for 2.5 to 5 hours a week, sports drinks are absolutely not required. A simple glass of water will do after you've mowed that lawn or just been to the gym for half an hour or so. But if you're doing something really intensive, such as if you're planning to run a marathon, James, or if you're going to be doing some bricklaying all day long and you're already quite thin and it's going to be extremely hot, you're going to be doing this for 8 hours, we're talking strenuous activity, then sports drinks might be helpful. But for the, you know, average mum and dad and their kids, they're simply not required. So
halfway through the marathon in the middle of the day, but if you're not running it?
Yeah. So just if you can have a look here, we've got an illustration with the sugar cubes.
Oh, yes.
These sports drinks can contain anywhere between about 9 and 11 teaspoons of sugar in a bottle.
I had no idea.
So that's really very similar to a can of soft drink.
Okay.
So people think, you know, they're very healthy. Some people think they're even healthier than water simply because they're promoted
because
as
the
sports. Well, that's right. But they're just another way to consume sugar, which for most people is not required.
Sometimes they're in the healthy part of the, you know, next to the orange juice and stuff in the fridge, and the Cokes are in the other cabinet.
Yes. So you've got to be really careful and not be misled by all these clever marketing strategies, because although they're formulated for these elite athletes, they're unfortunately promoted to the masses and they're widely available next to all the other drinks, but really you need to consider them as just another sugary drink out there with the lemonades and the colas of the world, and used judiciously, if at all.
So you're exercising hard, the best drink is still?
Water.
Still water.
Simple water, and you know, followed up by a good healthy meal. For most people, that's all that's required.
Okay. Well, Sue, I just hope that everyone is exercising more, that we're feeling thirsty. I need to feel thirsty more often.
That's true, and often, you know, by the time people do feel thirsty, by the time that thirst mechanism kicks in, they're already dehydrated. So it's important to drink plenty of water before you exercise, during your activity, and even afterwards.
So there you have it, folks. If you're feeling thirsty, reach for a glass of water. If you're not thirsty, reach for a glass of water. If you're exercising, just drink water, isn't it?
The best way to go.
Yeah, thanks, Sue, so much. And I'll see you next time. Thank you.
Discover some of these artists from Salter Music. Anna Weatherup.
Oh, people get ready for the train to Jordan.
Castles in Air.
Like watchmen wait for the morning light.
Eric and Monique.
You alone are my strength, my refuge.
Sapphire.
His love reached the bottom of the ocean.
No matter what shade of musical taste you have, you might just find something that sings to you. It's all waiting to be discovered at saltermusic.com. Fresh and exciting original Christian music from Salter Music.
Hi, welcome back. Welcome to you too, Brad Watson from Avondale College of Higher Education. How are you?
Very good, thank you, Ken. Thanks for having me.
Now, Brad, you head up the Poverty and International Development Studies area at Avondale, is that right?
Yes, I do. It's a job I've been doing for about 10 years.
Okay. And the reason why I really wanted you to come in and talk to us today, Brad, is that a number of our viewers, and myself included, sponsor children. Now, you've done a fair bit of research in this area of child sponsorship. Who invented the idea?
Well, it seems that child sponsorship was invented in about 1919, after World War I.
Oh, wow, that early.
Yes. It looks like the Save the Children organisation was responsible. It was only newly formed then. And it occurred at a time when thousands of children in European countries were starving after the war.
What is the scale now of child sponsorship around the world?
Currently, depending on the estimates, we think there are between 8 and 12 million children who are sponsored. And we think it raises several $billion for developing countries. So it's a very important way of giving. World Vision by far is the largest child sponsor, and they estimate that they sponsor between 3 and 4 million children.
Boy, that's huge.
It's a lot.
And in Australia, Compassion is pretty big with child sponsorship.
It's one of the bigger ones, yes.
Yeah, Asian Aid, you know, we've had some people from that organisation here. We've also had people supporting Compassion here in the studio. So, you know, this is something that is, you know, close to a lot of people's hearts. Now, you've written a book. I know you didn't write every chapter, you edited it, and other experts wrote different chapters, but the book's about child sponsorship. Some people are concerned about that as an approach. Well, why would that be when it seems such a lovely thing to do?
Those criticisms come particularly from the 1970s and 80s, when some very large organisations were growing super fast. Some of their overhead expenses were up around 30 and 40% of the dollar that was going into their admin costs. And what some of those organisations were doing was making sure that the funding that did go to children was only benefiting the children. And so sometimes it wasn't benefiting the community or family members or other poor people surrounding that child. Another issue was that even up until the 1980s, the sponsorship of children in orphanages was still very common. And the big organisations began to realise that they had created orphan rushes. They'd built big, expensive orphanages. Often they weren't administrated as well as they could have been, and often they filled up with children who did have a mum or a dad or an uncle or somebody else in the family who would like to have taken care of the child. Unfortunately...
So this is situations where there's a poor family, they're struggling to look after their kids, and they say, well, I can't seem to get any help for my family, but I know my child can get help if they're considered an orphan, and they go to an orphanage because they're well supported by international donors.
And families were making that economic decision. If we lie about our child's status, we can get them a good future.
Wow.
But some of the big organisations began to say, look, it'd be better for us to help the family than to just take the child and put the child in a institution of sorts.
But some organisations choose not to sponsor children still.
Linking an individual to an individual can sometimes become more about the sponsor. And a lot of money can be siphoned off from the child to make sure that the sponsor receives letters and receives updates, and it can be an expensive way of supporting an individual child. Yes, and to some extent, a number of the leading sponsorship organisations are now doing fundraising with child sponsorship, but they're now also working with communities to benefit individual children rather than only helping out the individual. Look, I should say that I myself sponsor 3 children. And 2 of those children are individually sponsored. They go to a school, but their siblings do not. Their mothers are poor, but the mothers don't receive any help. And as a consequence of writing the book, and this is something I'd encourage all your viewers to think about, is would it be better where possible to assist the family as well as the child, or just to assist an individual child? And I personally am on a journey, I guess, where I'm tending to think it's better to help the family around the child.
The whole family. Wow, okay. Well, that's, you know, one practical tip that I guess we can take away from that. Brad, any more just as we finish off?
I think it is important to follow your heart to some extent. A lot of giving for us Christians is a spiritual decision.
Sure.
We have a sense of God's Spirit leading us, prodding our conscience to do something for others.
And it's very biblical as well, you know, to help the widow and orphan in need.
Of course it is. And to some extent it is a personal and subjective choice. But one thing to consider is that the different sponsorship organisations go about doing their business differently. And so it's great to do a little bit of homework on who you're going to sign up to.
Sure.
I personally would go for an organisation that keeps less than 20% of the sponsorship dollar for its own
for overheads,
administrative costs. Some are much higher than that, and they disguise the true costs of it. And I personally would also suggest that you go for an organisation that looks at holistic child development. And that might mean that there's some spiritual benefits for the child in that, but perhaps it could be in their own cultural context rather than ours.
Wow, okay. Food for thought there. Boy, sometimes, giving's hard, isn't it? to give wisely.
It is hard, but it's also wonderful. And just to share a personal anecdote, my family have had the opportunity of travelling to India, and we have visited one of our sponsored children.
Oh, wow.
And I, on research with my students, visited one of our girls who was sponsored and was very humbled to have her wash my feet, as is her cultural custom. And all that time I thought I'd been blessing her, and there she was blessing me.
Boy,
so it is very touching, and it can be quite profound. Perhaps the last thing I would slip in is if I can, for 80 years since the earliest sponsorship programs, sponsored children have been saying letters are really important to us. Don't just sponsor us, communicate with us. You guys are almost like a god. You're like a dad. You're like a mum. When the money comes in year after year without any communication attached to that, it is confusing for them. You may underestimate it, but they certainly don't, and it can be really treasured. So look after that relationship if you sponsor a child.
Wow, touche. That's something for me to think about, that's for sure. Thanks so much for your time, Brad. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
We'll be back straight after the break.
Join us for the 2014 Bible Discovery Retreat in the beautiful Blue Mountains. Check out this spectacular lineup of speakers: Gary Kent, Jeff Yulden, Johnny Murison, Dr. Christiana Lamena, Sharissa Fong, Lyle Southwell, and Danielle Sinnott. Book online now at discoverycourses.com.
So you think you've got your future all planned out, right? Or maybe you're not sure yet. What you want to do, who you want to be. But whatever path you choose to study, a great education matters. Because it doesn't just help you get a great job, it helps you prepare for what life can throw at you and live a great life. Avondale, it's education designed for life.
Hello. Well, thanks for watching this week, and hey, thank you too, Sibel, for helping us out.
Not a problem, Kent. It's always fun to drop by.
And since, you are a teacher, I've got to say I've noticed whenever you're here, it is always just that little bit more educational.
Well, I hope you've been taking notes, because there'll be a test a little bit later on.
Look, if only we had the time, Sibel, we don't. Hey, thanks for being a part of Record in Focus this week. Stay in touch, and don't forget you can catch any segment of the program again via our website, Pop Quiz.
record.net.au.
That's the one. We'll see you next time.
God bless.